Hey everyone, it is Jeremy here, and today I'm going to show you how to make pan-seared pork tenderloin, a little apple chutney, and some roasted fingerling potatoes. It is going to be absolutely delicious. The first thing we're going to start with is our fingerling potatoes. We want to get those nice and well cooked. We'll start cooking them in a boil and we'll roast them afterwards so you get a really nice texture inside. In my pot of boiling water, I'm just going to go in with a nice amount of salt to season that water so we can start the seasoning on our potatoes right now. I want in a pretty big handful, and this is just plain kosher salt. Once my water's at that rapid boil, I'll go ahead and drop in all of my little fingerling potatoes. And we're using fingerling potatoes today. They're a nice fun potato. They roast up really well. We're gonna cut them on the bias, and I love them because they're long so you can get a lot of surface area exposed inside your potato. We wanna get them cooking about an hour before the class. We'll cook them until they're beautifully fork tender, and then we'll finish them in the class, but I like to have a little time so they can cool before we're slicing into them. I do not like cutting hot potatoes. I have blistered my fingers that way before, and it is not fun. But we're gonna start on our apple chutney. That's to cook down for a little bit, so I like to start with it, let it cook down, and then have a second to kind of chill out before we serve it. So I've got 2 Granny Smith apples. I like Granny Smith because they are nice and tart. So I'm just gonna go ahead and peel up these apples. And I like to use that nice peeling motion. Make sure you're going from top to bottom. So I'm gonna peel up both of these apples and just give them a nice fine dice. When I'm slicing my apple, I like to start by cutting off just the littlest bit from the top and the bottom, so I have a nice flat apple to work with. And then I look around the core, and I'm just gonna slice lobes off. So I know the core is right here. I'm slicing off one cheek of the apple right around that core, the next cheek of the apple, and then I'll lay it on its side and slice off the other 2 apple cheeks. And so I like to come in, kind of take my lobes, slice those lobes in half, and then I'll come along the top of that apple and just make some little batons. And I want about like 1/4 inch little cubes. You don't have to be too precise with this. It can be a little bit rustic, but then I'll come in and just get a nice little dice on these. And you get those little apple cubes that are about 1/4 inch in total, and that's what we're looking for. And those can go right in to our little sauce pot over here. Our potatoes over here have been cooking for about 15 minutes. I wanna go in, check, and see that they're done. The way I like to do that is with a fork. So I'm gonna grab my fork and just stab my potato. And you just wanna see that potato is nice and fork tender. The fork goes through easily. You can touch it a little bit, see that it's a little soft. You don't want to keep those potatoes boiling. If they keep boiling, that skin can kind of crack off and you'll get cracks in your potatoes. You want your potatoes to look nice and whole. It makes them more presentable. But I'm gonna go ahead, drain these off, and just let them sit. I want them to sit out at room temperature for about an hour just so that they're not super hot as we're cutting them. I've got all my apples diced up and they are just in my pot. To my apples, I'm gonna add a few flavor things. I'm gonna add a few things to make almost a gastrique in here, some vinegar and a little bit of sugar, and it's all gonna cook down together to make a really delicious flavor. So I'm gonna come in, I like to look at it as the little troll head of the shallot, the little tail end with the hairs. I'm gonna chop off my troll head, and then to dice my shallot, I'll go ahead, slice it in half horizontally, and I might do a couple slices because this one's a nice large shallot. I'll come in, do my nice little vertical cuts, and I'm keeping that root end intact so it holds everything together. So I'm just slicing to the end of the shallot, and then I'll come along the face of that shallot and just give it that nice dice. But I don't want huge chunks of shallot in here. If I see any big chunks, I'll just kind of run my knife back over those chunks and just mix that in with the apples. So the first thing I'm going in with is my 1/2 cup of apple cider vinegar. Then I've got a 1/4 cup of apple cider, a 1/4 cup of orange juice going in. We've got a 1/4 cup of brown sugar, and we've got that brown butter truffle honey. We're gonna go in with about a 1/4 cup of that as well. It's leaving you just enough behind so that you can have a little snack as you're going. Dip your apples in it with a little brie. A treat for the gods. I'm gonna go in with just a little knob of ginger for a little extra flavor, my cinnamon stick, and my teaspoon of mustard seeds. I'm just gonna get this on to a medium heat, give everything a stir, and let it cook down together. We're stirring this, just making sure everything's coming together. Keep that on a medium heat, let it simmer. Stir it occasionally. It'll cook for 15 to 30 minutes depending on how high your heat is. What we're looking for is that the liquid has reduced. The apples have gotten nice and jammy. When you bite into them, they're tender. They don't have any crunch left. And my one little trick while you're cooking down this chutney is we're gonna cook it on a medium heat, but if you start on that high heat to bring it to a boil, you'll bring it to that boil and then reduce to a simmer. I always like to start with the boil because if you're on medium heat, it takes forever to get to that simmer. But if you start with the boil, you can reduce that simmer quickly and get the cooking going a little bit better. You don't want the apples to cook down to the point that they are like mushy. You just want them to soften. And so with these potatoes, I'm gonna go ahead and cut them on a nice bias. You've got that long potato. I'm gonna cut it in half. I'm gonna expose as much of the center as possible while I'm doing that. And I'm gonna get these into a little bowl and we'll season them with a little salt, with some oil, just so they're ready to be seared. And the thing you'll notice with these potatoes is they are really nicely cooked already. These are like ready to eat. So what's gonna happen as we toss them in the oven, we're just gonna sear that beautiful outside of the potatoes so you get that little crispiness. We'll get that nice saltiness in there and you'll have that beautifully fluffy interior while you get that beautiful exterior. I'm gonna go ahead, I've got all my potatoes in a bowl. I'm gonna toss them with just about 2 tablespoons of my canola oil and a nice hefty pinch of truffle salt. You wanna be pretty generous with your truffle salt. Potatoes love salt, so I'm going in pretty heavy with that salt. And I'm just gonna toss that all together. Don't worry if any are breaking up, it is fine. Always taste for seasoning. So I'm tasting them, they are really nicely seasoned. They're gonna be delicious as we cook them down. To get these perfectly crispy potatoes, you technically could throw them in with the tenderloin right before you go in the oven. I like to give them a little pre-sear so you can get that color going and then toss them in with the tenderloin so they marry in flavor. So I've got a cast iron heating on a nice medium high heat, and I'm gonna go in with just about 2 tablespoons of canola oil just to get that pan nice and well coated. And so I'm seeing just a little smoke on that pan, kind of move it around. I'm just gonna land my potatoes in. They should sizzle a little bit in there. They're only going in about 30 seconds until you get a nice golden brown on that potato. And as I'm putting these in, I'm placing them all flesh side down. That flesh side is gonna sear beautifully. Every once in a while, I like to tilt that pan, make sure oil is getting underneath all of your potatoes. And we'll just cook until you're seeing a beautiful golden brown underneath all of those potatoes. Once I've cooked all my potatoes, I'm just gonna give my pan a little wipe out. Be very careful as you're doing this, it is nice and hot. So I don't wanna get any little gunky bits. And then I'm gonna get this on to that high heat, let it start heating up while we get our pork ready to go. So I've got my beautiful pork tenderloin right here. And the one thing we wanna do about this, it's got just a little silver skin on here. And the silver skin is just a little bit of a tough part of our pork tenderloin. So I wanna go ahead and just get that removed. My pork has been sitting out for about an hour, hour and a half, just so it can start to come to that room temperature. It's also drying out on top. It's feeling nice and dry, and that'll give us a really nice sear on our pork. With this little silver skin, just this part, it's a little thicker. It doesn't cook beautifully. So I like to go in with my knife, gently kind of start slicing underneath it. And you're trying to avoid as much meat as possible. You just want to get that little silver skin. Just coat this in the dry rub spice mix. And I like to be very generous with this, press it into all the crevices. In here we've got some smoked paprika, some garlic and onion, mustard seeds, and then we got a little brown sugar and salt. So the salt's gonna season our meat. The brown sugar is gonna really help this get a nice golden brown caramelization. I'm also assembling my basting kit, so I've got 2 tablespoons of butter set aside, my rosemary and thyme, and I've got some garlic and it's skin on, and I'm just gonna give it a little smash. So that's ready to go. My pan is on a nice high heat. I'm gonna give that about the rest of my oil. You just wanna give your pan a nice coating of that canola oil. Once that starts to smoke, we'll go in with the tenderloin and we'll cook it till we just get a nice sear on the outside. My pan's a little too big, so I'm just gonna wrap the tenderloin in the pan. We'll sear about 30 seconds on each side. And so I'm seeing some nice color going on. You can kind of smell the sugar caramelizing in there. That's what we want. That's gonna be our flavor. And I'm just rotating it every few seconds to make sure I'm getting that color, that flavor going on each side. And I've seared every side of this pork tenderloin. When I say I've seared every side, I've rotated it through, done about 3 to 4 rotations. I see some nice caramelization on every edge. So I'm gonna get ready to baste. I'm gonna set this pork tenderloin in the very top of my pan. I'm gonna drop in my butter, my thyme, rosemary, and garlic. And then I'll tilt the pan towards me. Let those herbs bloom a little bit. And then just hit my tenderloin with all of that delicious flavor. And then I'll go ahead, nestle my herbs, my garlic, everything kind of onto that pork tenderloin. And I'm gonna make some space for my potatoes so they can go in for their last cook. And I'll just get all of my potatoes nestled in that herby delicious butter. And at this point you can turn your pan off. You don't need any heat on the pan at this point. That pork tenderloin still needs about 10 to 15 minutes to cook. So I'm just gonna go ahead and pop this into a 400-degree oven to finish cooking. So my pork tenderloin just came out of the oven. It's been about 15 minutes. I'm gonna go ahead and remove it from the pan it was cooking in and just set it on a little plate to ensure a nice even finish cooking. Sometimes if you let it sit in that pan still, the carryover heat will cause one side to be gray, so we don't want that. And we'll just let that rest for about 10 minutes before we slice it through. And so the other thing that's happened is our apple chutney has cooked down beautifully. It's just looking amazing. There's still full pieces of apple while there's a little bit of like mushed apple around. It is tasting really nice. I'm gonna go ahead, remove my cinnamon stick and my little bit of ginger over here. If you taste your chutney and it needs a little bit of salt, you can always go in a little salt. Yeah, it is delicious. Do not disregard the drippings from your pan. We'll drape those on top. It's not really a full sauce, it's kind of like a broken sauce, but we get all the drippings. We have that butter in there, we've got that herb flavor. So our pork tenderloin has rested about those 5 to 10 minutes. I'm gonna go ahead and just slice into this. Now we got some nice, beautiful medallions of tenderloin. You can see the juiciness in here. You'll see it's not perfectly white throughout. There's a little pink right in the center. So I'm gonna just slice my little medallions over here. I'm going about 1/4 inch so we can plate them up, display them nicely. I like to do this on a nice large platter. I'm gonna kind of zigzag my tenderloin back and forth. I'm gonna drop my potatoes in just all around, showing off that amazing juiciness they've got. I'm going in with just a little bit of this pan drippings kind of over the top of that pork. And then my last little bit is that apple chutney. So I've got that apple chutney. I'm gonna do little dollops all over getting it into the potatoes around our pork. So this is your beautiful dish. You've got pork, you've got potatoes, you've got apple chutney. It is so good. I'm not gonna keep you from your dinner anymore, so dig right in, enjoy. Please, if you're enjoying, tag photos, tag at Jeremy Jarm, at truffle_shuffle_SF. I wanna see what you're eating out there. Until next time, everyone, happy mealtime.